Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to a special edition of Bama Standard Shorts. No, I'm not here to talk about recruiting today, but I'm sure very shortly that will come up as we got a few more guys that are going to be making their commitment announcements soon. So, the reason I'm here today, well, first of all, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe button, turn on all notifications. Jump in the chat, also jump in the comment section. Definitely want to hear your thoughts and feedback. And as always, we are brought to you by Workspace Solutions and Omont Financial Partners, LLC. They pay the bills and provide us with the fancy equipment that you see here. But yeah, today we are on day 3 of fall camp. And one of the most talked about groups for Alabama in this 2022 season are the receivers. But I feel like a lot of Alabama fans are overlooking one in particular. Maybe some have even written him off. And that's none other than JoJo Earle. Here to help me talk about this today is one of the finest analytical minds out there, Mr. Nick Rossetti, Alabama grad, contributor with the Sportscast on multiple occasions, and probably one of the most knowledgeable people out there. So I figure somebody like me who's from Mississippi probably needs some help. Thus, your presence, sir. Welcome in.
Justin, I appreciate it. Big fan of the Bama Standard. That intro got me pumped. And yes, you could call me the number one fan of JoJo Earle, and I know we'll get into this during our conversation, but I have a sneaking suspicion could be wide receiver 1 this year, coming out with a bang. So excited to chat about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you might be onto something. And what really sparked this, as you and I have talked before going on air, was a tweet that you recently put out saying that JoJo, in fact, is going to take that mantle that you just spoke of. And we need to remind Tide fans today why they should be considering him. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Coming out of high school, JoJo Earle possessed a lot of the same qualities that compared to Jaylen Waddle. Of course, as you know, man, with the departure of Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, and Jaylen, fans were very eager to keep that pace going, and you could even argue we were actually spoiled. So we kind of expected that plug-and-play type situation. If you're a 5-star, you should automatically go in and just go from 0 to superstar in 0.6 seconds. So, and basically what that means is Bama fans, we tend to get our heads in the clouds. Anytime a player or coach becomes a legend in what he does, every predecessor following him is ultimately graded against them. For example, every coach until Gene Stallings was graded against Bear Bryant. And even Coach Stallings himself was graded against Bear Bryant. And then you go to players. At Alabama, every wide receiver is ultimately graded against David Palmer, the Deuce, Deuce is Loose, Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, now Jaylen Waddle. Now, Nick, I think it's a tad bit unfair, especially so early. In speaking about JoJo, now some of these guys are able to take on that mantle and meet, if not exceed, who came before them. You look at guys like Will Anderson, Minka Fitzpatrick, so on, were able to do it, but they were the exception, not the rule. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think where I want to start with this conversation is flashing back to last year's recruiting class, specifically the early signing period, which would be December 16th, 2020. JoJo Earle was a commit of LSU as of December 15th, 2020. Now, on early signing day, he flipped. Why do players flip? Is it pressure from the coaching staff? Clearly, Bama saw something, and they wanted this guy, and for good reason. If you watch any of his high school tape, as you said in your intro, reminds you a lot of Jaylen Waddle, some of that quick burst qualities, really as a key slot guy, but kind of played all over the place. Also, not to mention a track star in high school as well. Something else that he had in common with guys like Devontae and Jaylen Waddle. Now, he comes into a recruiting class that included 3 other guys. 3 other guys, and Christian Leary, Ajay Hall, recently departed, and Ja'Cory Brooks. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but all 3 of those guys were early enrollees, if I'm not mistaken. JoJo Earle was not. So all three of those guys came in as true freshmen in the spring. They got spring practice in, they got an A-Day in, and JoJo Earle arrived in the summer, which means he's late to the party. And most guys that arrive late, you don't expect to see that big of an impact very quickly. As you named a couple of guys like Will Anderson and Minka Fitzpatrick, day one contributors. But guys that come in late, it's a lot to learn, especially as a 18-year-old freshman. And so we get to fall camp, and there's a lot of rumblings. There's a lot of rumblings about the receiver group, and in particular, JoJo Earle and his impact on the team. Now, I think that fans sometimes think that they are smarter than the coaching staff. I fall into that category every once in a while. But when there's smoke, there's fire. And then, sure enough, we get the worst day in Saban's words, the depth chart day for game one against Miami. And who's listed as a co-starter against Miami? JoJo
Earle.
Now, to go from a late arrival to go through fall camp and become a starter, clearly there was some type of impact. Clearly the coaching staff saw something in him in that short amount of time that meant that he was good enough to start and be a starting and contributor right away. So I think that build-up maybe had people overly excited about what he could potentially contribute. And I'll throw it over to you to kind of, get your thoughts on guys that arrive late and what their potential impact is, particularly for the receiver position. But before I do that, I did just want to give a shout out to something I've learned from Jimmy Stein ever at the Bama on 3 show.
Yeah.
He mentioned that most of the time, freshmen at Alabama only learn one position. Now, in our standard offense, we have 3 starting receivers, X, Y, and Z. When you saw JoJo line up this year, you only specifically saw him in the slot. Again, that goes back to what Jimmy was saying, is that you only learn one position as a freshman. I think that could be a detriment on him, to be honest with you, with the type of player that he is. And so I think that, and as you could probably speak of here in a sec, injuries and that type of thing played a role. But I also think the coaching staff is to blame for not the level of impact that we may have wanted to see.
Well, as far as jumping in early, I'll go back to A-Day the previous year. If you based the depth chart solely on what you saw in the A-Day game, you would have swore, and I was one of these people who was guilty, that Ajay Hall was going to be the starter. He was going to be that next breakout player. And we all know exactly what happened there. But which kind of leads me to my point. The point you were making, Nick Saban doesn't just hand out starting roles or significant field time to just anybody just because, they have the talent or the ability. If that was the case, Ajay Hall would have been in every single game, and we probably wouldn't have seen his epic rants on Twitter and anywhere else he had a social media voice. But in order to get on the field, and this is from talking to Bo Scarborough, my co-host of the Bama Standard, as well as other players who have played under Coach Saban, you've got to earn the trust of Coach Saban, and not just the coach, the trust of Coach Saban, the other coaches, your teammates. You have to excel in every area, not just in practice. You got to do it in the classroom. So there's a long list where you have to excel to even be considered. And JoJo Earle showed enough in that short period of time for Coach Saban to say, you know what, I think this guy has it. There's something about this guy that leads me to believe that he's ready. And one of the things he talks about the most is how do you add value? And yes, he does primarily excel in the slot position, mainly because of his size and his abilities, but also he can contribute in the special teams game, which is a part of the game last year where we weren't so good and we needed that electric guy. Didn't really have it last year. It was basically, who's going to be up this week. It was switching him out with Slade Bolden and a few other people, and there really was never that set guy. And ultimately, Slade took over, but in all due respect to Slade, he didn't quite have that burst or that twitchiness or those jets that we're accustomed to. But I feel like JoJo had enough value coming in that led Coach Saban to pull the trigger so early.
Yeah, I think too. The majority of the so look, let's name his stats really quick for the season: 12 catches, 148 yards. Now there were some injuries there. There were some drops there. Let's just call it what it is. And you named a player that did play a lot in the slot, and that's Slade Bolden, a contributor to your guys' show a couple of times. What I saw most out of him was consistency. Right, that guy caught everything in his route tree. And when you have things like drops, I think that also, gives the coaching staff some concern on if they can trust you to put you out there in the first place. And I think that probably goes to the mental game as well. You come in as a true freshman, you want to make an impact. And I think it may have gotten to JoJo a little bit. What I wanted to see and what I hope to see from some of the play calling this year is get JoJo involved in other ways than just running your traditional route tree in the slot.
Right.
Let's see some sweeps. Let's see some jet motions or something along those lines to get the ball in his hands and get him comfortable so that then he can gain some confidence in himself and excel to be the player that we think he can be.
And, yeah, you mentioned something I literally just thought about. If you go back to his high school film, he wasn't just playing one spot. He's playing slot, he's playing quarterback, running wildcat, playing running back. The coaches were very creative in getting the ball in his hands, and I feel like Bill O'Brien could utilize that and be very creative and draw up some plays for him this year. But then you got to ask, okay, well, how are you going to do that? Because now we got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's just recently arrived, that you can do 1,000 things with. You can even use Jalen Milroe in that regard. So what can you do with JoJo?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head there, and Saban said it himself, really throughout the summer is he wants to be more balanced and run a more balanced offense, especially with the talent that we have at running back this year, not to mention Jahmyr Gibbs. I also think Jahmyr Gibbs in particular is a great back out of the backfield to catch some passes. So I don't know if that also eats into some of JoJo's targets. But ultimately, I think that teams are going to line up with their best corner on Jermaine Burton and their second best guy corner on Tyler Harrell if those are playing the outside guys. And your mismatch is in the slot here in what JoJo can do with his speed and his shiftiness, all the things that we've talked about so far. And traditionally, maybe you see a safety on him. Maybe you see somebody playing that money role in a nickel package. But I think if him and Bryce can start getting some chemistry here over fall camp, that can be a real benefit to this offense throughout the extent of the season, because that is a matchup nightmare for defenses on okay, we got their two best guys covered per se, but who's going to cover JoJo? And man, is he fast. So I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it really has to do with his confidence. If he has full confidence in himself and his abilities, if you watch tape, especially high school tape, and I'm reluctant to go back to high school film because it's a lot different animal playing at a collegiate level. But if he is playing with that swagger that he's capable of, you really can't touch him. And you really start to see him gain confidence as the 2021 season progressed last year. You saw more of what he could do against Mercer when he had a total of 130 yards. Also, too, in spurts, he was picking up 10 to 15 to 20-yard gains, per catch. Yep. And he seemed to me like he was getting into some sort of a rhythm. Unfortunately, that injury came. Now, we don't know what the 2021 finished product would have looked like, but I'd venture to say, and I'm curious to hear what you would think, I'd venture to say he could have made a big impact in a national championship game, especially with the absence of Mechie and JMO, and it looked like the guys like Ajay Hall were just so underprepared.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to being a freshman at Alabama at any position is challenging, to say the least. And again, it's a lot of pressure on yourself to make an impact. But when you have an injury in the middle of the season, especially when you started off the season relatively well, played in those first 4 or 5 games and made somewhat of a small impact, and then an injury happens and you're out for quite a while, and it seems like you've been building up to kind of get to that breakout point, and it kind of gets the rug pulled underneath you. So again, I think that and again, he's a freshman, true freshman. So it's challenging, but another year in an offense with a full spring in mind, a full summer in mind, an off season to get your body healthy, another fall camp, particularly with the level of competition that we're going to have at that position. I think it sets him up for a very, very successful season ultimately, again, barring injury.
Right, and in regards to the injury aspect of it, mentally, not just physiologically, it's hard to come back from that. You don't just go back to playing, at 100 rating right off the bat. You have to gain confidence again in your abilities, but also whatever body part was injured. You got to be able to trust that fully again, and that does take a little bit of time. And a lot of fans were kind of giving him that last chance of the ultimatum prove it game in the 8A game. And he had several drops. And what I was looking at, I saw a young man who was anxious to come back from injury and was feeling the pressure from the fans and also the pressure he put on himself to ball out that game. And he didn't really have to. I feel like if he would have just calmed down, trusted himself, and secured the ball first and then took off, we may have seen, a little bit of a different output than what we saw. But a lot of fans are hanging their hat on that. And I think if you do that, you're making a big mistake, because you can't limit this young man to his first comeback experience being the 8A game.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And listen, we're spoiled as Alabama fans,
right,
in terms of freshman impact specifically. Guys coming in and making significant impact and being contributors right away. And not everyone, even if they're highly rated, are going to have that level of impact guaranteed every time. I think, and the fan expectation only makes that worse. I think a guy like a Jai Hall, can take that pressure and circumvent that in the wrong way. I think JoJo's handled it in the right way, right? Like, you hear all the right things. You don't hear any problems with him off the field. And ultimately, he's putting in the work behind the scenes to be the impact player that we all know he can be. And what I'm hoping for is the coaching staff and specifically Bill O'Brien puts him in the situations, like you said, to get him comfortable, get his confidence up, get his hands on the ball, and just let him take a deep breath and let his skill set do the rest of the work. And don't be surprised. I know a lot of fans were used to that offense of the quick slant and take one to the house. Yeah, here's him warming up in practice. There's Bryce Young, short like that. But dude, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a 7-yard slant that goes to JoJo Earle, and all of a sudden it's 75 yards to the house. That's his level of capability.
Absolutely.
Because the guy has absolute speed that you cannot teach.
Yeah, absolutely. He's, like we said already, he's very shifty. He can fake you out of your cleats, break your ankles. I think maybe the only thing he could probably improve on maybe his route running, but as you watched throughout the last season, that started to get a lot better. I think he's gonna fight for the ball. He'll even go up and climb the ladder and get that high ball. But he's a guy that if you're not on your P's and Q's and your awareness is not turned on, he's gonna beat you. If you give him a little bit of space, he's gonna turn that 3 yards, like you said, into a home run.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the rapport with Bryce Young is so key here. So it's great to see they're getting some reps in at practice, and in fall camp, that's something that is really where you build on something like that relationship. But ultimately, and look, here's a perfect go route to the end zone. This is what I'm saying. I hope that we move him around a little bit. Don't just confine him into that slot space. Maybe you see some mixed formations with Burton inside and JoJo outside, and that's going to only add another wrinkle that the defense will have to figure out. So yeah, I hope that for our sake and the success of this offense this year, we get JoJo more involved, we keep him healthy, and remind everyone why we were so excited about him coming into the season last year.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the other key factors that kind of depends on how well he does is Bill O'Brien, like you said. What is he going to do year two? He's got an insane amount of pressure.
Yeah.
Last year, he was not the favorite of fans. If you go on any podcast or any kind of Alabama-related social media platform, people were already calling for his head. Now, there's a lot of things I didn't agree with in terms of his play calling, but I can also look back, once I'm able to calm down and take emotion out of it. I think that a lot of his play calling was handcuffed due to having a bad offensive line, definitely an offensive line that does not live up to the Bama standard. I mean, we gave up 39 sacks were of Bryce Young, and another few were to Milroe and Paul Tyson. So 40-plus sacks. And when's the last time in Alabama history, regardless of what the team's record was, that you actually saw something like that? You didn't. It never happened. Alabama offensive line is probably one of the most historic positions in school history. So now you got Bill O'Brien and Hope trying to resurrect the offense, breathe life into the offense. And from what I'm hearing about Eric Wolford and what I've seen him do in the past, he's an offensive line whisperer. I mean, he had an offensive line that was a finalist for the Joe Moore Award in Kentucky. And if he can right that ship, and I think that just really opens up the play calling tremendously more for Bill O'Brien, and then you can start looking at doing sweeps, Wildcat, and other particular situations that would benefit a player like JoJo Earle.
Yeah, I think that all of those are really tremendous points. And look, I'm on the same boat as you. I think there were a lot of disgruntlement towards Bill O'Brien throughout the season, and particularly towards the end of the year. But let's be honest, you can't. I don't see the correlation between a Heisman winning quarterback and a bad coordinator. And ultimately a top 5 offense in the entire country. So you're exactly right. The offensive line does need to improve. And if it doesn't, we're going to see a lot of the same issues that we saw last year. Now, everything we've heard about Eric Wolford coming in from Kentucky has been good so far, particularly over the summer and even on the recruiting trail. But until, we're lining up in pads against Utah State here in a couple of weeks, I don't know what that's going to look like, and I think it'll be interesting to see. But you're exactly right. If we can give Bryce more time than he had last year, just imagine the capability is to be able to dissect the defense and maybe give JoJo Earle that extra second for that route to develop, and Bryce can get him the ball and we can make a big play. And again, I think that's something that does all come down to how well does the offensive line play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that the success of the offense rests solely upon that offensive line. But before we close, I just want to remind fans, if you look at it, in regards to the comparisons to Jaylen Waddle, you're looking at a guy who is a once-in-a-generation type player who, barring injury, could have gone down as the greatest wide receiver in Alabama history. No slight to Julio Jones or Devontae Smith. So, like I said previously, it's a little bit unfair to put that mantle on JoJo Earle right out the gate. And if you're expecting that from a young kid, you're going to be disappointed more oftentimes than not. Let JoJo be JoJo and just let things develop the way they can. And I'm a firm believer that this kid is going to be an impact player, and him and Christian Larry. When you get those two guys going, it's going to be like watching, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, and Jaylen Waddle. You're going to see the return of the rock, paper, scissors thing that we found so entertaining before, and we're going to have an offense that just lights up all the offensive numbers across the country. But I'm a firm believer in JoJo Earle, and I think 2022 is going to be his breakout season. And before I close, I'll turn it back over to you to give your final thoughts.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I would say this in week 2 here in Austin. If I'm Steve Sarkisian and I see Jahmyr Gibbs and JoJo Earle lining up to take the kickoff, I'm getting a chill up my spine on what could potentially happen there. But in all seriousness as well, I think JoJo is poised for a breakout year if he can stay healthy. I do think that even with a first round receiver and Jameson Williams gone, obviously the moving on of John Mechie as well, and all our prayers with him as he recovers. But ultimately, I think JoJo has an opportunity here to really establish himself. And if he can build on that rapport with Bryce Young and obviously some of the clips that we saw from fall camp, the sky's the limit with this kid. And I'm really excited for it. With that also being said, I just want to fire a shot across the bow for the rest of the Bama fans that were on JoJo last year. If I see that same behavior for Aaron Anderson, who's coming in this year from spring ball, a very similar player in terms of his style and his body type, if Aaron Anderson doesn't play as much as you think he should, and you think it's because he's not contributing or whatever it may be, just delete your Twitter account now and don't go after that kid because, he's not catching 100 balls and putting up, 10 touchdowns and 1,000 yards as a true freshman receiver. Let him get some time in the system, and there's a lot of guys in front of him. Give him some time to develop. So I just want to set proper expectations for everyone listening out there. Aaron Anderson needs some time as well.
I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. Excellent point. And if you missed it the first time, please go back and listen to what he just said. Bama fans, calm down and let things develop as Coach Saban sees fit, because he's the GOAT for a reason. But I appreciate everyone tuning in today. Before I completely shut it down, Nick, tell folks what's up next for you, how they can find you during the football season, and how they find you on social media.
Yeah. So I'm, as you guess you could call it, a free agent. Happy to jump on and contribute specifically around Alabama football, Alabama athletics, period. You can find me on social media at _Rossetti. It's my last name, ROSSETTI. And also on Instagram at _Rossetti77. Justin, it's been a pleasure, man. Really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man. It's fun as always. And you will be jumping on with the actual Bama Standard this season. So be on the lookout for that and have some fun with us. And we're going to have a lot to talk about, because it's going to be an interesting season. So looking forward to it, man. But, yeah, thanks again for coming on. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide, Justin. See you guys.
See ya.